Hello. Is this thing on? Yes. All right. How's everybody? Yeah? Happy 2018. Everybody excited to be another trip around the sun? Everybody good? Yeah? Awesome. Hold on. I'm going to switch hands. Actually, I couldn't hold the microphone with my right hand. It felt weird. So I had to switch. Anyway, welcome to Rockefeller University, to our newly rebranded RockEDU Presents Science Cafe for high school students. So previously known as LOL, but we almost got sued, so we had to change the name. I don't know, that was pretty exciting to receive this like giant cease and desist letter. It was my first. And hopefully it was my last. But now we're RockEDU Presents. So how many repeat customers do we have for RockEDU Presents? Amazing. How many of you are new to Rockefeller? Well, thank you for coming. Welcome. What school are you guys from? What school? Brooklyn Latin? Awesome. And how about back there? Who else is new? Only Brook. Oh, where are you from? Never mind. Okay. Awesome. Cool. So, yeah. Are you new? What's it? Health. Oh, you're not new. Goldstein High School for the Sciences. Where's that? In Manhattan? It's what? It's Coney Island? Oh, Manhattan Beach. Oh, there's a book by Jennifer Egan out at Manhattan Beach. Did you guys read it? No, not yet. I'm not sure if it... I'm going to make an assumption it doesn't fit your demographic. But maybe it will. Yeah. Cool. So, welcome again. Today we are going to be talking about a very awesome topic related to evolution. But before we do, I just want to talk about RockEDU. So, many of you may know me. I'm Jeannie Garbarino. I'm the director of RockEDU Science Outreach here at Rockefeller. And we are really pleased to have the K-12 community walking through our gates every single day, through lab experiences, through research programs like Lab Jumpstart. So I know a lot of you have applied to Lab Jumpstart. We also have the Summer Science Research Program, or SSRP, during the summer. So if you are interested in doing more beyond attending a lecture series like this, and you want to get your hands dirty in science research in any way, please learn about our programs on our website or come talk to me. I'd be happy to talk to you about what we have for you to get engaged with science in a very deep way. Also, if you would like to do any kind of social media-ing, if that's a verb, I'm not sure, we use the hashtag RockEDU, so you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Twitter. Does anybody use Twitter? No, right? How about, oh, yay, we have one person. Feel free to live tweet. How about Facebook? Is anybody on Facebook? Because you can like our page on Facebook, but you can feel free to also snap. All right, if you want to snap any of this, we keep on asking Snapchat to let us have a geofilter, and they keep on declining our request. But one day, we're going to have a pretty sweet geofilter for you guys to use for snapping. Yeah, I guess let's get this party started, right? So we are excited to bring to you two amazing scientists, Diane Kelly and Patty Brennan. So Diane is a functional morphologist, which is kind of like someone who does mechanical engineering in reverse for animals. And she does this at UMass Amherst. Patty is an evolutionary biologist who works at Mount Holyoke College in the biology department, and both have studied genital anatomy and function in a wide variety of vertebrates. And in this talk, they will share what they've learned about how evolution has driven the amazing diversification of form and function in copulatory organs. So this is going to be a great talk, and it is certainly central to biology. So I'm very excited that we get to bring this to you today. So thank you both for coming, and I'm going to kick it off and hand it over to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this not enough? All right, excellent. So,
are the lights okay for you? Do you want them up or down?
We could dim the front lights a little bit. That'll be fine. Thank you. set the mood, you know. We're going to be talking about some...
Izzy, set the mood.
That's right. So I'm going to get started by talking about something that's probably a little bit more familiar to all of you, which has to do with mating in nature. So a lot of biologists and a lot of scientists for a long time have been studying what we call the struggle for mating, which was the idea that Darwin had, you know, over 150 years ago, that has to do with what animals will do to actually reproduce, right? And oftentimes that results in the evolution of traits that can be a little bit counterintuitive. So remember that Darwin, you know, was all about traits that would increase survival. But then he noticed that there were some traits that didn't really seem to increase survival. In fact, they look like they would really not help at all. And so if you look here in this sedge grouse, here is a male and here's the female. And you can see he's not like camouflage or hidden in any way. He's got all these crazy traits that make him very conspicuous. And so why would a male have such weird traits? Well, the answer is because he wants to have sex with someone. And in order to do that, he's really in that struggle for mating. He is going to make himself beautiful, or he's going to make himself seem really, you know, competitive and have traits that are going to help him to outcompete other males. And so either he's going to have traits that allow him to seduce the female, so she looks at him and she thinks he's very sexy, and so she's going to mate with him. But it also oftentimes results in traits that promote males winning a fight, for example. And I have some examples here. So for example, beetles, they have these nasty horns or the antlers in the ear that allow the males to win fights. And Darwin assumed that this was pretty much the end of the story, right? Because remember, Darwin lived in the Victorian era, where essentially, you know, you had sex for the purpose of having babies, and women had sex with only one person, and that was it. So whoever you mated with, that was it. That was the one who was going to sire the babies. And it turns out that since then, we've actually learned that the struggle is really not for mating. The struggle is actually for fertilization. Because females, it turns out, are not monogamous in nature, right? And I'm not talking about human females, although that can apply for human females as well. But I'm talking about females in nature in general. Females are not monogamous. They tend to mate with lots of different males. And then they choose among those males sperm that they would prefer to use to sire their babies. So the struggle is really for fertilization. And this is something that we have learned a lot more recent, maybe in the past 4 decades or so. And so during this struggle, there are different events, right, that are not necessarily like the traits I just showed you, seducing a female or outcompeting a rival, but traits that can happen during copulation itself. So for example, things that have to do with stimulating the female, so the female would be more likely to use the sperm from those males, or to deposit sperm farther inside of the female, so those sperm will have a higher chance to actually fertilize in the eggs. So they can happen both during copulation or after copulation. So after the sperm are already inside the female, sperm, for example, have different swimming speeds, and sperm that swim faster are the ones that are more likely to fertilize the eggs. And then the eggs themselves can actually often reject sperm that they do not want to use to fertilize their eggs. And it's a really fascinating area of evolutionary biology, understanding these processes. And so we know actually a fair amount about what happens here in these after copulation events, but we know almost nothing about what happens during copulation itself, okay? So this is really odd. If you think about it, we know less about copulation than about any other behavior in nature. And this is odd because if you are interested in evolution, actually copulation is really where it's at, right? Because your evolutionary success is going to depend on whether you are able to pass on your genes to the next generation, and you can only do that if you're successful during copulation, more successful than other males, or more successful than other females in getting better genes for your offspring. So copulation is essentially critical to evolutionary success. So we know, and we have known for a few decades, that genitalia are probably one of the most diverse organs that we find in the animal kingdom. So these are illustrations from a book called Sexual Selection and Animal Genitalia that was published about 40 years ago. And right here, these are a bunch of hemipins from snakes. And you can see that they look a little bit like medieval torture devices, right? They have like all these nasty spines, and you're like, what? That's a penis? That looks really weird. And it does look really weird, but this is snakes. These ones over here on the right are mammals, right? So if you look at mammals, mammals also are incredibly diverse in the shape of their genitalia. Many species also have spines, weird hooks, all sorts of things going on in there. You have a question? Yeah.
Where from the snake does the male part come?
So this is the cloaca right here. I'll show you. I'm going to show you a picture, so you're going to see exactly where. But it's like tucked inside their tail, and it only comes out when they're going to mate, so you never see it. So the question is, why would genitalia be so diverse? If you think about it, the job of a male intromittent organ is really simple. It's essentially to put sperm as close as possible to the female eggs. That's it. That's what internal fertilization is all about. And you could do that with a simple tube. But of course, these genitalia are not a simple tube, right? They are really complicated. So why do we need to go to such lengths in order to perform what would seem to be a fairly straightforward biological function? So there are several potential explanations. The oldest one is up here. Species isolation is this lock and key idea. This was a hypothesis that was proposed maybe in the 1800s, and it was proposed for insects because it turns out that insects have such diverse genitalia that you can oftentimes sex species that are otherwise completely identical on the outside by looking at differences in their genitalia. And that's how you tell species apart. So what scientists figure was that essentially the male genitalia are like keys that are fitting into specialized locks, which are the female genitalia, to prevent them from mating with the wrong species. So that it serves to reinforce species formation. Now, since then, this seems like a reasonable idea, and there are a few species of especially insects where this seems to be the case, but by and large, it's shown not to be a general pattern to explain the diversity of genitalia. Instead, what seems to be happening are more hypotheses related to sexual selection. So again, success during mating and fertilization, okay? And so there are, again, same processes as we see just to gain a mating. So it's competition among males. And this essentially takes the form of males that have longer penises than their competitors can deposit their sperm farther inside of the female. Therefore, they're going to win the fertilization. It can also be in the form of female choice. Males that have penile features that allow them to better stimulate the females are going to be more successful because the females will be more likely to use sperm from those males. And I see some of you are going like, whoa, yes, it's true. And then there is also sexual conflict. And sexual conflict is a really cool mechanism. It's actually probably the one that I'm going to be talking about the most today because it's the one that I have centered my research on. And what this is about is essentially that we know and we understand that the evolutionary interests of males and females are not the same. So even though both males and females want to raise babies together, most of the time, how much work each one of the sexes is going to put into successfully reproducing is different. So everybody wants to get away with cheating a little bit in this game. And that can result oftentimes in really counterintuitive adaptations that often play out in the genitalia. And I'm going to show you some examples of these. So for a long time, I have been studying ducks. And so this is a photo actually from the cover of Nature. This is an Argentine lake duck, and his penis is about 43 centimeters long, much longer than the male himself. I know, it's just, evolution is cool, I tell you, people. And so this whole thing, this whole penis is kept inside out in the body of the male, okay? And this is, by the way, like the champion among the vertebrates. And Diane and I are going to be talking about vertebrate genitalia today because if you look at insects, forget about it. You know, it's like completely crazy in there. But there was a paper that came out a few years ago where they found an interesting pattern. They found that the size of this enormous penis in ducks was actually related to just how promiscuous they were. So species that are more promiscuous, meaning species where the females are mating with more males, tended to have much longer penises. And so that would suggest some kind of mechanism maybe of male-male competition that was driving the size of these penises. But in my research, I was actually really, in a way, almost concerned about where this penis actually goes. Because if the penis is this big, like, is the female like empty? Does she have like no body organs anywhere? You know, like you have to wonder. And it turns out that nobody had actually asked that question, even though you know, ducks are everywhere in the world. We eat ducks. That are like farms where ducks are, you know, dead everywhere. Nobody had actually wondered, well, if a duck penis can look like that, what does a duck vagina actually look like? So this is an illustration, really, of how important it is to have diversity in science. Because I think it was a combination of the fact that I'm a woman. And of course, you know, I saw this and I was like, so where does it go? You know, I want to know. So the fact that I was a woman, but also the fact that I'm Latina. And you know, there are people from other cultures that are a lot more reserved around sexual issues who will probably be decapitated for saying the word vagina out loud. But I am not from one of those cultures. And so we tend to have a little bit more open when it comes to sexual discussions. And so I think that was also something that helped me come up with this idea. And so I went out there and I looked at female ducks. And I was very surprised because what I found. So here I'm showing you, here's a male penis, and in this case, it's not as long as the other one. This is a Peking duck, so this is the kind of duck that you would see running around in a farm. And so the penis is corkscrew shaped, and what I found, this is the female, so the females have a cloaca, so this is the vent or cloacal opening in birds where both the poop and the sperm come out from. And so the females, they have these vaginas that are incredibly convoluted, right? And what is really interesting about it is that when you look at the male penis, how it spirals, the males spiral on a counterclockwise direction, whereas the females spiral on a clockwise direction. And they have a series of pouches at the entrance of the vagina that are essentially blind pockets. So it looks literally like this is an anti-screw device because it's going in the opposite direction than the pattern in the male. So why would there be such a need for having this weird genitalia? Well, the reason is actually because in ducks, promiscuity takes a really dark turn. Ducks, by and large, form pair bonds where the males and the females stick around together. But it turns out that oftentimes ducks that are not paired, males that don't get a mate, they will actually fly around to the breeding grounds in the spring, and they will find females who are in breeding condition and force them to copulate. And that's shown in this little illustration here. So there is a female in the middle, and she's surrounded by a bunch of males that are essentially trying to force her to copulate. So what we're looking at here is an example of sexual conflict, what I described as the difference in evolutionary interest between the males and the females that has led to the evolution of this really convoluted genitalia. Now, the really cool thing about it is that you can actually go and look at a bunch of different species of ducks. So not all ducks have these forced copulations. Many ducks are really, really nice, really, you know, they don't go around pursuing females or anything like that. So ducks that are pretty monogamous, purely monogamous, they have very short penises, like this harlequin duck and these African geese. And you can see that the female vaginas are just straight tubes, okay? So they're simple tubes, no convoluted structures whatsoever. But here and here we have a long-tailed duck and a mallard duck. And both of those have lots of forced copulations going on. And you can see that in those species, the male penis is long and the female vaginas are really convoluted. So that's a clear example of coevolution. So essentially, the penis allows the male ducks to force females to copulate, and the females have evolved a counter strategy that prevents those males from being successful. And this is an illustration of how this actually works. We have done a series of experiments where we have shown that this is really the mechanism of exclusion of the penis, essentially where the penis just gets turned around in this labyrinthine female structure, And then the females regain control over which males are actually going to sire their babies. And they always give more paternity back to their own partner than these unwanted males that are literally falling out of the sky to try to gain fertilizations. And so it's a really cool example of how this sexual conflict can drive these evolutionary patterns of diversity in genitalia. And so, of course, you're probably wondering, well, but the females have these weird, complicated vaginas. How do they have sex with the duck that they like, right? Oh, there. How do they have sex with the duck that they like? And the answer is that when females are going to have sex with their own mate, the male actually does a pre-copulatory dance where he, goes around with his feathers and, does all sorts of fancy displays that may essentially put her in the mood. She lays prone in the water with her tail up, and then she starts contracting her cloaca, and that helps to relax her vagina so that then she can allow her partner, her wanted partner, to actually go through the lumen of her vagina, the opening of her vagina. So anyway, it's a really cool system to actually look at these questions of sexual conflict. But I was really curious to see, well, are these ducks just weird? Because the story I just told you is like a weird story, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it's like forced copulations and weird penises going one way and weird vaginas going the other way. So is this just a weird, strange thing that happens in ducks just because they're strange? And it turns out it is not. Yeah.
Do animals stay within their own species? And like, what if one male approaches a female in a different species with like a different vagina?
Oh, in the ducks? Yeah, so that's an excellent question. In fact, they do not. Ducks hybridize like crazy. And they hybridize in both directions. So males with short penises and females convoluted vaginas, and males with long penises and females with simple vaginas. So they hybridize across genera. Yeah.
Would males with like long penises approach women with like the not so complex, like simple vaginas, or it doesn't really matter?
They go any which way. Yeah. They'll do all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah.
What if another male were to do the dance?
Well, so what happens with ducks typically, the question was, what if another male were to do the dance? Would she be more interested? So what happens with ducks is that they actually form their pair bonds during the winter in these wintering ponds. And during that time, there's always more male ducks than female ducks. And the reason has to do with the fact that females do all the incubation alone. So they tend to die more because they get eaten at the nest, or they're in really poor body condition by the time migration times come. And then when they migrate, they just die more, right? And so there's always more males. So the female is really choosing the best male that she likes among all the guys that are around, right? It's like going to a dance and, you go out there and the sex ratio is like 80 guys per 30 girls. You would have your pick of like which male you would like. So it's the same situation. So by the time she actually makes a choice, it's a guy that she's really convinced is the best quality male. And in fact, these guys that are doing these forced copulations are essentially the evolutionary losers of the game. So it's unlikely that they would be accepted by the female because her mate is likely to be a higher quality already. Yeah. They choose males based on their dancing abilities. So the male ducks have very stereotypic, incredibly complicated dances. Try to Google a couple of videos and you'll see they do all sorts of pirouetting and great stuff, and also on the base of their plumage. So ducks are also among the most beautiful birds. They have really complicated plumage. They have a structural color in their feathers, and they also have pigmentation in their bills and their legs. And both of those are signals of good health and quality on the males. Great questions, you guys. All right. And so, but it turns out, so what I'm going to say next is that ducks are actually not that weird, even though they're plenty weird. They're not that weird. So these are actually the hemipins of a snake. So you were asking about the hemipins on the snake. So in this picture here, the tail is down here, right? So we're holding the tail and kind of pushing up. And snakes have actually two penises. They're called hemipins. And they are full of spines, typically closer to the base. And in the case of the snakes, they actually use only one hemipin at a time. So it's not like they're using both, but they're using one and then the other one. And if you look across different species of snakes, you'll see that there's a lot of diversity. So here's, for example, a couple of species of rattlesnakes. You can see that theme of having a bunch of spines towards the base. But you can see that some of them are longer, some of them are thicker. Here's a prairie garter snake, so they can have, a lot more hammer-like shapes, etc. And then what I'm showing you here on the right are models that we make of the female vagina, but of the inside of the female vagina, right? So I'm interested in seeing how the male and the female genitalia actually fit together. Is there something happening during copulation that is changing the likelihood that one of these males is going to be more successful? And so what we do is we literally inject dental silicone inside of the female cloaca. We let it cure, and then we pull it out like a little plastic lollipop. And then we make three-dimensional models of that, and then we do shape analysis to try to see how these different structures are evolving. And you can see here I just put two different examples of two species of female snakes. The one in the top is a black rat snake, and the one in the bottom is a green vine snake, just to illustrate that the females are just as variable as the males. And so a while back, this idea that females could actually be really variable was rejected because I guess people hadn't really looked all that carefully at the females, and so nobody has been really examining female genital morphology very closely in vertebrates until fairly recently. So one of the things that I do is then I actually, in my lab, we do this little bit of Frankenstein science, where we take these specimens that we remove from the males and the females, and then we inflate the males in situ, inside of the female. And this is not exactly like copulation, I know, because everybody's dead, but it is as close as we're going to get, right? It's like, okay, so how do you figure this out? You have to come up with some techniques. And so what I'm showing you here, this is a model that we made showing the male that's shown in green here inside of the female vagina, which is shown in this kind of transparent tissue. And one of the interesting things is that if we don't know how the male and the female fit together, it's really hard to understand how these structures actually have evolved. So these males actually are that species that I show you when I inflate the males alone. Their hemipins look kind of like a little hammer. But when I inflate them inside of the female, they actually adopt the shape of the female, which makes a lot of sense. So we need to really study the males inside of the female to try to figure out what's happening during copulation. And this is one of the species that we've been looking at, trying to understand a little bit better the evolution of that particular feature of snake hemipins that I talked about, those spines. And so we did some work in Manitoba, up in Canada. It's a beautiful place where red-sided garter snakes hibernate, and they come out in great numbers. There are thousands and thousands of snakes on the floor, and you can't even put your foot down. You have to be like, excuse me, and move the snakes out. And they're preoccupied only with having sex. Essentially, they come out of hibernation, and that's all they want to do. So we did a series of experiments, essentially, where we hypothesized that the spines on the snake hemipins were allowing the males to stay attached to the females for longer during copulation. Male garter snakes make a copulatory plug. It's essentially like a chastity belt, if you will, that stays in the female cloaca and prevents her from mating for the next 3 days while the plug dissolves. So for the male point of view, it's to his advantage to copulate longer because he can make a bigger plug. From the female point of view, though, she's like, no, there are lots of other males here. I don't want to have this plug. I want to mate with other males. So there is conflict there between the male and the female to control the duration of copulation. So we did some experiments where essentially we allow the males to mate, and then we actually cut their spines. So we cut the hemipin spines, literally using a tiny little pair of scissors. So we just go in there and we cut the spines, and then we let them mate again. And when we did that, so these are the males that were not treated at here in black, the first mating and the second mating, there wasn't that much of a difference. It drops a little bit, but it's pretty much the same. But when we clip their spines, the second mating is dramatically shorter. So that's suggesting that, in fact, the males can prolong copulation duration because of the presence of the spines. And then the other thing we did is we actually anesthetized the female cloaca, so the female vagina, to show that females actually have a lot of control over copulation duration by contracting their vagina, essentially pushing the males out when they're done with copulation. So we did a series of other experiments subsequent to this where we combined those two experimental treatments. And what we were able to show is that essentially the males that have spines, when they have their intact spines and they're copulating with a female who's anesthetized, they can copulate for so long that they can make these giant copulatory plugs that essentially would last for a very long time. So the interplay between the female ability to contract her vaginal walls and the male spines has resulted in kind of an optimal compromise of copulation duration. That is what we see when we just go and measure how long the species copulate for. So that's yet again another example of sexual conflict. And I'm going to talk about one more. Are we good? Yeah, we're still good, right? Okay. So there's one more example here. And this is, again, evidence of sexual conflict now in mammals. And these are dolphins, everybody's favorite creature. I don't know if that's going to be true by the time I'm done talking. But essentially, dolphins, we have been collaborating with a postdoc who collected a lot of data on vaginal variation in cetaceans, in different species of cetaceans. Cetacean is another word for a marine mammal. And so from a whole bunch of different species, you can see that the vaginal shape is very variable, right? So different species have different shapes. That is always, evolutionarily, we always see this diversification within a group as evidence that there are some forces that are acting on those particular structures to make them that different across species. But it turns out that what we really have been spending more time recently doing is looking at that internal shape of the female, because even though the structures are variable in 2 dimensions, they are even more variable in 3 dimensions. And so we use the same technique that I show you for the snakes. We inject them with dental silicone, and then we get out like a mold of the lumen, the channel on the inside of the female. So this whole structure is the female vagina, and you can see that those vaginas are incredibly variable. For example, this one has a whole bunch of folds. It has a couple of regions where it spirals, almost like a duck. You can see this one, you have a big pocket and then a big narrowing, the whole structure comes to a very narrow point, and then it continues on. This one even more so. You can see how long and skinny this channel is right here. So there is a lot of variation in the shape of those, in the internal shape of those dolphin vaginas. And again, the question is why? So we did the same thing as I showed you with the snakes. So essentially we take the dolphin penises, and this is work that we did in collaboration with Diane, where we inflate the male penises in the female vagina, and then we see actually how they fit together. And what we did then is we actually take this into a CT scanner, and then we get an idea of where the male is going, how far can he get into the female. And so what we found is actually that female dolphins have a series of vaginal folds, but not all species have it, only a few. Some species have one fold, and other species have many, many folds, up to 13. And so what we found is that those vaginal folds inside of the dolphin vagina prevent the male penis from progressing forward. So the penis shaft gets stuck. So it's almost identical to what happens in the duck, where the females are putting barriers to the penile penetration. And so this is what we see here. So this is the female vagina there, and essentially this penis is getting blocked in the first fold. And what I'm showing you here is what we did with different species, where we generated these models, and then we started to rotate the male. So in this case, the male is shown in the pink, and the female shape is shown in the blue. And so when we rotate the male at different angles inside of what would be the female shape, we can see there is only one position in which the tip of the penis can actually go through the rest of the female vagina. Right? And every other way in which we turn this penis, it doesn't work. It would just go into a blind end and it would get stuck. So what this means is that actually, because dolphins are mating in a three-dimensional environment, there is actually, and I should have said this at the beginning, there is a lot of sexual harassment that goes on in dolphins. So even though the males can't really force the females to copulate like the ducks do, male dolphins will often travel in groups of males, and they'll travel together, and they will harass the females until eventually the females like, fine, I'll copulate, just leave me alone. And what we think can happen here is that the female, she can allow the male to copulate, but in the last minute she can just twist her body ever so slightly, and then essentially send the penis tip off into one of these blind ends, where his sperm is actually not going to make it out of the vagina. Which is really remarkable if you think about it, the fact that females can evolve these barriers to prevent unwanted males from achieving any fertilization success. That's the part of the talk where I always want to shout, female power, because I think it is amazing. Female power. Yes, it's really cool. And the fact that it's evolved over and over and over in different groups is really remarkable. And so, we have evidence that these vaginal folds actually evolved in the shape of the male penis. So this is two different species of dolphin. There is a bottlenose and a harbor purpose. If you look at the harbor purpose female, that's it. If you look, this is the male. Female, that's it. This is the male. I know. You wanna hear my totally inappropriate joke? But I just can't hear my totally inappropriate joke. I'm like, this is why dolphins look like they're smiling all the time. This is why dolphins look like they're smiling all the time. All right. So really, what we think is happening is essentially the male penis shaft. So this is essentially not that whole thing going inside of the vagina. Thank goodness, because otherwise, poor female vagina. This is almost like an arm, right? Like having an extended arm. These guys are having sex in the water. They have to jump around. The males are trying to find where to go. It's a really complicated thing. So we think that essentially this shaft right here is being stopped at this first vaginal hole, but then you see this little filiform tip. So that little tip can actually keep going up further into the vaginal lumen, so that it can fertilize the female. Now here's the other species. This is the bottlenose dolphin. And you can see this is a penis. Now this is pretty much all that we protrude of that penis. So this is a tiny little penis with just one little bend. And so you can see that it almost perfectly fits into this kind of space. Perfectly. Where the shaft would be stuck here, but the little penis would bend. Shaft would be stuck here, but the little penis. So there is a lot of evidence for this coevolution going on. All right. So yeah. So it's Diane's turn. She's gonna talk to you about the diversification function. She's gonna talk to you function. And I think we'll have more questions at the end.
All right, can y'all hear me?
More questions at the end.
Okay, great. Can y'all hear me? Okay, great. My notes up. Let me get my notes up. Hello. All right, so Patty's told you about how. All right, so sexual conflict, sexual selection affects genital development, genital evolution makes it genital development, incredibly evolution makes it, can turn them into these really scary, scarily diverse, anatomically diverse organs. What I'm here to talk about is organs. The other end of the idea of sexual selection. Darwin also came up with the idea of natural selection. I'm not going to talk about the idea of aspects of natural selection, which is largely about the aspect of natural selection, which we know is not true, and that in the vast majority of animals that have penises and vaginas, the vast majority of animals that have internal fertilization. I'm going to talk about the type of natural selection in which something about the type of natural selection in which something because work. Sex is complicated. Because sex is more than one thing can be going on with genitals at the same time. With genitals at the same time. Let's think about what Darwin said about natural selection. He defined it as natural selection. He defined it as an effect. Some animals, so you have, the point is that you have a reproductive system. The point signatures, anatomical signatures that work are the ones that are going to eventually produce babies. So if you have eventually produce babies, so if you have really strong selective pressure, really strong selective pressure, have to physically work, have to physically any change in the system that produces more offspring. A change in this can wind up getting passed on in that ring. Can wind up getting passed on in that system that doesn't work very well and have no babies. No babies, no genes have no babies next generation, and no babies, no genes has to go to the next generation. So again, Patty talked about how the assumption for many years is that population is a simple function. That population is a simple function. So in the sense that yes, you could conceivably just do, in the sense that yes, you have food conceivably just have sex with a simple tube and a simple just have a simple sleeve and have it work and a simple sleeve and have it work. Now to figure out how this, but there we go. Now to figure out how this. There we go. If you think about copulation as an engineering problem, the way I do, there's really nothing particularly simple about it. There's really nothing particularly simple about it. Animals like and that's especially true with animals like this rhinoceros, who have evolved specialized other mammals, internal fertilization, male or internal fertilization, and female male or male interact and female structures. So when you think about it this way, you can see that when you think about it this way, you can see that there's a problem for which these animals involve solutions. These animals have to evolve solutions. We can divide them into sort of two very broad functions. We can divide them into sort of two very broad functions. Intermission, which is one of those is female copulatory organ, problem with getting female copulatory organ, whatever form it happens to be, reproductive inside. And then there's a reproductive insemination where the male is now going to transfer insemination where the male is now going to transfer sperm from his body into the body and hope for the best. Both of these functional tasks, both of these an integrated cascade of physiological events to work in order for the production for population to turn into how much genital tissue, no matter how complex the genital structures get, no matter how complex the genital structures successfully complete these two visits. They still have to successfully complete these two visits. That some elements of their anatomy and physiology, their anatomy and physiology within a group, any group are always going to reflect. Within any group, are always functional reflect successful solutions to those functional problems. Focus. We can talk about this for a lot of different animals. We can talk about this for a lot of different animals. I'm going to focus this talk on mammals. This part of the talk on swimming of vertebrates and mammals. That Patty has already discussed. Where Patty's already discussed in the realm of penis and vagina function. In the realm of sexual selection. This is a phylogenetic tree. This is a phylogenetic relationship. It shows among these really large family relationships between among these really large groups of mammals. You can see where mammals are. You can see where mammals are. You can find where swimmers are. You can follow here to the back and find out if they have an ancestor. Down here at the base, a somewhere deep in ancestor. Both somewhere deep in the past had a family member in common. Had an ancestor, family member in common. Had an ancestor that we have right now. And the best evidence that we have right now is that coming from developmental biology is that the snakes, even though have these hemipenes, the squamous penises and the lizards have these hemipenes, they have two penises effectively, and nevertheless, although they wanted, they nevertheless both inherited all the development, the penis development, all the penises from developmental machinery that make penises from a common ancestor, so that which this common ancestor to that groups probably had a common ancestor to both groups probably had a penis too. It's also reasonable to assume that common ancestor shared the same ancestor that probably shared the same anatomical features that mammals and mammals share. The snakes and the basic also happen to still share. This is basic comparative biology. One of them is that the penis is a kind of inflatable. One of them is that the penis is a kind of inflatable stored in a flexible, more flexible folded up more or less folded up or tucked away fluid form, and it's inflated with fluid, usually which can be either blood or lymph, depending on what kind of animal we're talking about. But it's inflated with fluid across the spectrum we're talking about. But it's inflated with fluid to its reproductively relevant form. So, and in that, when it's in that storage form, and the wall of that storage is probably reinfolded, and it's reinforced. It was probably reinforced by these fibers of incredibly common collagen. So collagen is an incredibly common animal protein. Your tendons are all made of it. The fact that your tendons are made of it tells you something about how it behaves mechanically. Tendons are stretchy, and tendons are stretchy, and they're stretchy, but they get stiff when you're also stretchy. So collagen fibers are also stretchy, and then they get stretchy initially when they're folded, and then they get stiff as they're pulled on. So resist being pulled so initially they're easy to pull because they're folded. Once they're straightened out, they become really stiff and hard to pull. So mammals and the squamates both inherited those things. They have done, however, very, very different things with them, which may well be in response to each group's particular style of copulation. All right, so let's start with mammals. Here's a pair of dictics. They are. So here's a pair of dictics. They are. I know what they're called. I didn't make up the name. They are in the process. Obviously in the process of mating. But this is a really good illustration of what is the predominant and, in fact, only mammalian style of copulation. In mammals, males shift their phallus into the reproductively active form before contacting the female. So they get their penis becomes erect before intromission, before there was any interaction with female tissues at all. This, from a mechanical standpoint, favors a penis with a very high bending stiffness because it has to push against the female in order to gain entry to her vagina. So the mammalian penis has to be able to withstand forces, any forces that might be produced by female tissues, either by inertia, because female tissues have inertia, or by any sort of active muscular contraction that the female is producing. And this is going to be true when the female is receptive, as well as any time that she might be in any female that might not be all that interested. Now, the way this happens, bother. All right, my video's not working. Demonstrate anyway. All right, I will demonstrate anyway. It is definitely not as exciting as you're thinking. All right, so here's the diagram. All right, so here's a diagram of a mammal, a typical mammal penis, with a cutaway that shows the organization of collagen fibers inside the wall of the erectile tissue. So mammals have this inflatable, inside the penis they have this inflatable structure. It's called the corpus cavernosum, but you don't need to remember that. And you can see from the difference between a flaccid penis in cross sections, and this is not obviously the whole penis, it's been inside in half, so that you can see the inside. So imagine it would be coming out of the board at you, or not, depending on how you feel. All right, so the flask of, but you can see that this is the space that would fill with fluid, fill with blood, and you see there's this fairly thick wall. That is all of those collagen fibers, and those collagen fibers are arranged around the circumference and along the length of the penis in two layers, one of which is arranged, one layer is runs parallel to the length of the penis, the other one runs in basically hoops around the erectile tissue in circles around the penis. And this is a very, very specific organization of fibers that allows the penis to become very stiff. It is in fact it turns out to be the organization of fibers that makes the penis as stiff as it possibly can get if it's being an inflatable structure without any bone or or other stiff material in it. So that means that what the video would have been, it was a little, I have a model sock that, I'll show you a picture. Basically, it's a sock. It has with a balloon in it. It has. It's surrounded by a fiber, an envelope, a sock-like envelope that has fibers that are going in the right direction. And then it's, you know, it's just me trying to bend it and showing you that it doesn't bend. Yes. Which hole are we talking about? This hole? Top right, that is a, top right, that is a, so these are a retractor muscle. That is just a big vein that is supplying that muscle. So these holes there are the urethra. All right. So, oh, there's another, go ahead. No, these guys. These are from a project I did a number of years ago. I took fresh tissue and I artificially inflated it with saline or with formaldehyde, so that it would be. This particular one would have been artificially inflated with formaldehyde in order to fix it in its erect form. Penises are actually pretty easy to work with for that because they're socks. You detach them, they're socks. You detach them from the body, you fill them with fluid. Bingo, you have erect morphology. All right. So mammals have, and this is true of all mammals. They have this fiber organization around their erectile tissue that leads to high bending stiffness and lack of shape change in erect tissue. I'm going to move on to, and on the female end of things, this is a mammalian mating systems produce friction in females. So females have actually used the same physiological mechanism that males use for erection to swell vaginal tissues and secrete a sort of plasma derivative that acts as a lubricant, and the lubricant reduces friction. Vaginal wall also has folds, which allows it to stretch around the penis during copulation, and since mammals are also give live birth, they also stretch a lot. They can also stretch a lot more when it's time to give birth to babies. All right, these are features that are conserved in every mammal we've surveyed, no matter how elaborate other parts of their genitalia get. All right, let's talk briefly then about squamates. So here's a pair of Carolina anoles making the next generation of Carolina anoles. Hemipenises, you have already seen in an earlier slide the hemipenises. The hemipenises are not as stiff as mammalian penises. They are actually kind of squashy, and they're a little flexible when they're inflated. So, but squamates also have a very different style of copulation. In squamates, males shift their phallus from being flaccid and folded up inside their bodies into their reproductive morphology by when they put their vents together and they inflate into the female. It inflates that hemipenis into the female. So high resistance to bending, which is so important in mammals, is not relevant for squamates. In squamates, the hemipene is basically filling the female space kind of by crawling, by effectively sort of crawling up the vagina, unrolling inside of the vagina and holding on with some of those spines instead of pushing into it. The anatomy reflects that. Here's a cross-section of a hemipenis. Here's one that Patty, here's a beautiful stained section of a hemipenis that Patty made. You see it's much thinner compared to the mammal. All the blue is the collagen. It's much thinner. It's not as highly organized. And as a result, the erect hemipenis this is probably why it's a lot easier to bend, because it doesn't have that highly organized array of collagen fibers. With the male right next to the female, you've already seen one of our dolphin pictures along the top, male into female. So we see in each group the same pattern of copulatory style and the functional aspects of the functional aspects of the tissue is repeated over and over again, is conserved over and over through millions of years of evolution within each group. There's diversification, but it's like there are little mountaintops where it works really well. Physics is probably what is driving these particular points in time, these particular points in style. Because failure is an option. Penises experience compressive forces. They can experience torsional forces, which means they can break. These are both examples from mammals. One is showing you the hematoma here. See all that here? That light stuff? That's blood that is not inside the erectile tissue. That is not good. And some mammals have bones in their glands. Those can break. And vaginal tissues can also experience tears in response to localized compressive forces and tensile forces. So what this tells us is that there are limitations to what evolution can do for these structures that are imposed by the material properties of and structural arrangements of genital tissues. And that kind of natural selection that acts against where failure to copulate, injury produces failure to reproduce, may serve as a counterweight to sexual selection and all the massive diversity, the craziness that sexual selection can produce. And so that's the end of, that's how things work. And both Patty and I are more than happy to answer questions.
So we are going to come around with microphones so that everybody can hear your question. And as always, we do have swag for the question asking. And I just want to say this was the best RockEDU Presents we have ever had. So thank you. All right. So, yeah. Okay. So whoever needs to get out of here, go ahead and get out of here. But if you're staying, do so quietly so you're not interrupting other people. I'm going to hand one of these microphones over to Nika. Okay, so raise your hand and I'll start over here.
Do animals with lower birth rates tend to have more specialized genitalia?
Guys, everybody keep it down so we can listen to our colleagues and their questions. Can you repeat the question?
Do animals with low birth rates tend to have more specialized genitalia?
That's an excellent question.
It really is.
But I don't think that.
I don't think
No.
I don't think there's any sort of direct correlation.
What is your motivation for studying about this topic?
Because it's awesome.
We're sick old ladies.
All right, I'll take one over here.
Let's have one over here.
No, I'll answer that a little bit more.
As will
I was doing my PhD in Costa Rica. I was studying these birds that are called tinamous that nobody really knows anything about. And I was studying their mating system, and I was doing my PhD at Cornell University, which is like the best place to study birds in the world, right? Because everybody there knows a lot about birds. And one time I was watching these birds, and I saw them mating, and when the male pulled out from the female, I saw this thing hanging off his cloaca. And I was incredibly surprised to learn that it was a penis, because at first when I saw it, I thought he had parasites. Like I had never heard the word bird and penis in the same sentence. So I didn't even know that birds could have penises. And I was like, why isn't everybody talking about these things? They're so weird. So when I came back from Costa Rica, I started doing some reading, and then I found out that, in fact, nobody was talking about bird penises for at least 100 years, and I was like, okay, looks like I have a project. So,
whereas on my end, I, again, when I was doing my dissertation, when I was looking for a project to work on for my doctoral studies, I happened to be working in a wonderful lab at Duke University. So I had this fantastic advisor who would literally let his students do anything they wanted, as long as you could prove that it was beautiful. If you could prove that it had to be scientifically beautiful and visually arresting. I happened to be really interested in the problem of convergence, which is how you get similar in an evolutionary context, how you get similar structures evolving independently multiple times. And internal fertilization is one of those things. It has evolved, when you look across animals, it has evolved many, many times independently. And in a lot of time, you don't actually have to have a penis in order to have internal fertilization. But often when you have, once an animal taxa evolves internal fertilization, some of them will evolve penises as well. So I got really interested in the problem. It's like, how does this thing work? And I started doing the reading and found out that no one knows how this thing really works. There was a ton of work on vascular stuff, how blood goes in, because guys get really upset when that doesn't work. And there's a ton of work on...
Girls get upset too.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. There's a ton of work on innervation, but it was all very much in a medical sense rather than how does it work in general. And there was nothing on how the soft tissues produce this amazing change in from being something really flexible to being something really stiff, which is a really interesting mechanical problem as well. And as I said, my advisor would let us do whatever we wanted. So I was able to show him a beautiful photo, and he said, beautiful photo of the collagen and fibers. And he said, go ahead, you have a project. And I've been doing it for like 25 years now.
So what are your future research might be? What are you guys thinking about?
Oh, what isn't there happening?
Well, so one of the biggest things I'm doing right now is I'm doing moving to three-dimensional studies of all the different groups of vertebrates, penises and vaginas. And so I have a bunch of students in my lab who essentially spend all the time doing photogrammetry. And we are working out on the analysis technique for analyzing these 3D models and figuring out how to compare different species so we can get at this question of how shape actually evolves in different groups from a common ancestor, right? So kind of like an evolutionary understanding of that. And then the other big thing that we're interested in is the clitoris morphology. So we're just starting looking at the morphology of dolphins, but I also have a lot of tissues from birds and reptiles that also have clitoris, just like mammals do. And just kind of trying to get at the question of sort of what is sexual pleasure like for other vertebrates that are not necessarily humans or rats, which are the ones for which we know the most.
Whereas on my end, I'm a functional morphologist and a physiologist. I'm very interested in how does it work. So I'm working on a project. One of my projects is about crocodilians. So I am trying to. The crocodilians have very, very unusual penises where they're permanently stiff because they have stuff so much collagen into that what was that vascular space that they can no longer inflate themselves. They just stay like a little stiff rod inside their cloaca all the time. But in order to mate, they have to push it out, and then it has to be. There are these sets of tendons that haul it back in. So one of my projects right now is doing mechanical tensile tests of those tendons to try to build up a picture of how what their mechanical properties actually are. One of the reasons that's interesting is that there's really this particular system really has two sets of tendons, two of which act like big stretchy rubber bands and just pull the penis in really fast. The other is more like a point of contact, sort of a fulcrum that it rotates around and it holds it in place inside the cloaca. They're made of exactly the same material. There's no chemical difference between them, but they have vastly different mechanical properties. And one of I'm working with some engineers because they're really interested in ways of taking one material and turning it into different structures that have different mechanical properties by only using one material and changing the way that material is arranged.
All right, so let's see. How about over here?
What difficulties did you face while conducting your research?
Well, I got stopped by the police once.
You were just arrested once?
I wasn't arrested, but the policeman did stop by this. I was doing a dissection on the side of the road, and the policeman did want to know what I was doing. I was able to convince him that I was not a lunatic, or at least I was not a dangerous lunatic.
Yeah, I think I had a penis explode in my lab.
That was my fault.
It was all over my hair. It was everywhere. Yeah, it was gross.
All right, well, let's go down here. I feel like woman power.
I just want to know, why were you dissecting something on the side of the road?
I wanted it really fresh. It was already dead. It was road killed. But I wanted the specimen, and I wanted it really, I wanted to get it into the preservation fluid really fast, rather than putting it in a bucket, driving the 15 miles back to the lab, and then doing the dissection. I wanted to get what I needed right then. And also, it's field bio.
You told a story about it, right? You told a story about this?
I did tell a story about that.
There's a podcast all about it on the Story Collider. I recommend listening to it.
I have one more question. Do you see any organisms that have sex as a more recreational activity?
Yeah, for sure. So there are two main groups that we know have sex, not necessarily just for reproduction, and they are dolphins and bonobos. So both of them have sex for pretty much every social circumstance, and they have sex, males with males and females with females and all sorts of things. Well, it gets a little kinkier than that, because it's like adults with juveniles and, yeah. It gets really complicated really fast. But yeah, those are the two main examples.
So, the two types of animals you showed are ducks and dolphins. Since dolphins are underwater and ducks are on surface, are there any differences between them two, since they're in different types of locations?
Sorry.
So the environment, so being on top of the water versus under the water. Dolphins are in the water. How do they differ from the ducks, which are populating
Yeah,
on top
so
of water?
of course dolphins have a big challenge. It's a twofold challenge, really. One is that they are in a three-dimensional environment, so mating in a three-dimensional environment is a lot harder, right? Because getting it right
And not only
more
that,
work.
they're stuck with the mammalian system where the penis becomes erect, and then they have to navigate into the female.
So they probably have a lot of drag acting on the penis as the male is swimming really fast trying to get on the female and stuff like that. So there's definitely that is a big difference. And then the other one is also that because they are in the water, there is the risk that seawater is going to enter inside of the female, and salt water is lethal to mammalian sperm. So that would be a big problem as well.
Okay. You've been waiting.
How much and what kind of research has been done to find the common ancestor between mammal and non-mammal genitalia, and has there been any progress?
Well, the problem is that ancestor is long gone, right?
So we have
extinct,
to right. So we have to use. So what we do is we use comparative. When we use comparative biology looks at. We accept that we accept the fact that the most recent common ancestor, the hypothetical common ancestor, whatever it was, that's why it's hypothetical. We're probably never going to see that hypothetical common ancestor or find a fossil of it. But if we look at all of the living organisms and try to figure out what these animals have in common, and find and look at those animals on a good family tree, we can trace where changes happened in that tree and try to reconstruct a story of how things changed over time.
And the other problem, of course, is that even if there was, some kind of intermediate fossil form that you could find, soft tissues do not fossilize well. And so finding evidence of penis traits or vaginal traits would be pretty much impossible.
So my question is that, so the class of the animal and the reproduction. So, can let's say a higher class male would a higher class male have a bigger or smaller penis, and when it comes to class, does it?
What do you mean by higher class? So you mean
like a high class female who has a higher position? I mean, high class male who has a high.
In the hierarchy.
Talking about quality.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's like a high quality male, and I think it differs it's different for different species.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So there is a general principle when it comes to reproduction that essentially makes males a lot more likely to have sex in more circumstances than females, and that's because theoretically, although this is kind of like an oversimplification, sperm are cheaper than eggs. And females tend to be the ones that get stuck with all the parental care. And so it makes males more likely to mate with more females, so they would be more likely to mate with females regardless of the female quality than females. So from the female point of view, a female would always want to prefer a higher quality mate than a lower quality mate.
Here we go.
What limitations do you see in, I guess, future research in both of your respective topics?
Money or lack of thereof. So with our current government, let's just say that there's not a lot of support for sex-related research. So of course we're in the States, which despite all the progress we've made in so many areas, is still a very prudish place, and people are still like, oh, penises, why are you looking at penises and vaginas? And so I think that's really the biggest challenge, is to get funding for this kind of research in the current political climate.
Well, I'd say another challenge is that there's just so much. There's so much that's not known. I mean, we can't do it alone.
That's right.
We need help. We need more people interested in doing this.
Over the course of your studies, have you encountered any species that have prepared countermeasures for sexual diseases?
Sorry? For sexual diseases. So I just started a project where we are looking at the immune regulation of the vagina in female rats. So rats and mice, males have lots of spines in their penises. And essentially, I want to test a hypothesis, and I'm collaborating with an immunologist. The females in species where the males have these penile spines, that they have a existing immune response already in place because they know that their vaginal tissues are going to be torn and scratched and all that during mating. And so that in those species, those females will be protected against, for example, sexually transmitted diseases, but also trauma, et cetera. And they would also have a faster healing response in the face of those challenges. And so stay tuned.
So there's, in the crocodilian project that I'm working on, we've also, one of my collaborators on that came into it by looking at what's called the sulcus. So crocodilians don't have a closed urethra the way that mammals do. It's an open slit. And because their phallus sits inside the cloaca, and the cloaca let's put it this way, they only have one hole. There's only one opening, which means pee comes out of it and poop comes out of it and sperm and the penis with the sperm comes out of it. So everything goes in there. In fact, cloaca is Latin for sewer. So it's a descriptive word. Everything goes into the sewer. But one of the things he found was that some of the tissue inside this groove has a lot of immune system properties. It produces mucus that has a lot of they dump a lot of white blood cells in there. And his hypothesis is that that's because there's all this other little crap that is all over the phallus, and that the sperm need to kind of be protected against.
All right, so let's go with one more question. So Nika has it.
So my question is, you talked about a lot about animals that fertilize inside, but what about animals that fertilize externally, like fish and stuff like that?
Oh, it's a whole other world, and it's really interesting. It's just there's just not enough time to talk about it all. So let's take you. So when you fertilize externally, there are all sorts of problems about dilution. I'm just going to talk about mechanical problems because that's my oyster here. So if you are an animal that throws your gametes out into the water, say you're literally an oyster and you are just throwing your gametes out into the water, or even better, something like a coral on the Great Barrier Reef. If you just throw your gametes out there, your gametes are tiny and the ocean is really big. So how are those sperm going to find the eggs that they need to fertilize? Turns out one of the things they found that one of my colleagues, Mimi Cole, who's at UC Berkeley, has studied with the animals in the Great, and some of her students have studied with the corals in the Great Barrier Reef, is that they have turned the three-dimensional problem of sperm finding eggs into a two-dimensional problem. So not only do they release all their eggs and sperm simultaneously based on environmental cues, so they have sort of this coral orgy where they just spew gametes out into the water. Those sperm and eggs are also buoyant. So everything floats, even though they're down here in 3 dimensions all over the reef, all of their sperm and egg float up to the top of the water, forming this two-dimensional slick. And by collapsing the space that the sperm need to swim around in, they have a much better chance of finding eggs and those eggs getting fertilized. So those are the sorts of problems that external fertilization winds up having to face. So just a whole other suite of really interesting physical problems.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's give these guys a round of applause. This was an awesome talk. I feel like I learned a lot. And please hang out if you can, because they have brought some samples of things out there. So we have a little bit of an activity, a bingo trivia activity centered on some specimens.
And wait, before
collected.
You leave, also, if you're going to get the bingo cards, we do have prizes for the first 3 people to get bingo. So you do have to go to each station and guess what
thing it is.
Yeah. You have to
and-
identify the specimen.
Yeah. And so meet any one of our scientists here, and then we can give you the cards and give you prizes.
All right.